right, everyone, it's 4 o'clock in the East, and so continues the story of the boy who cried rigged election. Donald Trump has asserted over and over and over again, without any evidence for nearly 6 years, that the 2020 election, which he lost to Joe Biden, was stolen from him. He has never, and still has not, produced any evidence to prove that claim. According to Donald Trump, though, that was going to change last night. He promised, quote, really big news, and finally, the smoking gun proof of election interference. Yet his 25-minute primetime address lacked any evidence, any details to substantiate the things that have been coming out of his mouth. The declassified documents he released showed nothing new. And some of the things he released even undercut the things he was saying. From the New York Times report, quote, an examination of the more than 270 pages of evidence released by the White House supports the broad conclusions already announced in 2020 and 2021, albeit with some finer details. For example, China considered modest attempts to influence opinion in the U.S. and downloaded publicly available voter rolls from several states, but never manipulated a single voting machine or ballot. One document was very blunt, saying, quote, we assessed that vote tabulation systems would be difficult to manipulate on a wide enough scale to compromise election results. The one finding of actual evidence in our intel of election interference that Trump revealed last night in his document dump shows that it was Russia who meddled in Donald Trump's favor. Now, for all of Trump's bluster and lies and production last night, we can take it to mean one thing, that emotionally and psychologically, he's still not over losing to President Joe Biden. And two, he is, if we trust the pattern, likely to repeat these claims of fraud ahead of and beyond the November midterms, where he and his party, if you look at every single poll available, are poised to lose big time. The bottom line of no substance from last night's spectacle was underscored by Trump's most intimate advisor on this specific topic in a quick interaction with John Solomon after the speech. So Solomon is this conservative reporter who has publicly questioned the findings of the 2016 Russia investigation. He was recently hired by the White House to serve as a special government employee. But he said this to our colleague Von Hilliard.
Did you acknowledge that there were no votes changed in 2020?
All I can acknowledge is what the intelligence shows, right? I only know the intelligence community has zero evidence that someone has flipped that a foreign power flipped a vote in 2020, 22, or 24.
You're able to acknowledge that Venezuela has not tampered with voting machines in the United States?
No, the intelligence is very clear. They did it on their own machines. Why is it important that they did it on their machines? Their machine protocols are the same as America. Why? Because for a long time they did exactly.
And so the 2020 election was in fact the results as we, the American public.
I'm still researching, so let me. This is the first.
But there's no intelligence.
Not yet.
There is no intelligence that the election would have said that Donald Trump was president.
The president said that tonight.
So the whole reason for last night's speech was the opposite of what John Solomon blurts out there to Von Hilliard. What he blurts out there is that there's, quote, zero evidence that a vote was flipped. That big reveal is where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Senior White House reporter Von Hilliard joins us. Also joining us, voting rights attorney and Democracy Docket founder Mark Elias is here. And with me for the hour, Media Matters for America President Angelo Carusone is here, because what Fox did with this is nothing short of gobsmacking. But I start with some of the most important journalism of the last 6 years. Von Hilliard, what you got Mr. Solomon to say on camera. Explain how you did that.
Handpicked Donald Trump appointed special government employee just 1 month ago at the White House, finds his way onto the White House North Lawn after that speech last night and publicly stated that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, and that there were no votes that were changed. To say, Nicole, that I was stunned by the admission, I think would be an understatement. But I think it hits and cracks at the heart of the fact that these are the folks who have had their hands on this raw intelligence material, the same material that people like John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, and Tulsi Gabbard had their hands on for 16 months. And hey, as I was told by sources, if there was information to reveal that Donald Trump had lost the 2020 election, they would have released it to the public. And last night was their best bet and their best effort to try to do it. And John Solomon, in kind of a wild turn of events, publicly stated there that that was just not the reality, completely undercutting the pledge by Donald Trump that these Democrats were crooked as hell. And there was, over the last 5.5 years, he wasn't going around the country saying there was a covert influence operation by, foreign governments to undermine his candidacies. He had said that the election was stolen, that there was fraud, and that votes were changed and interfered with. And what we have last night was a direct admission from his hand-picked employee that that is just not reality, and that's never been the case.
Let me play this again. Everyone in America needs to see this.
You acknowledge that there were no votes changed in 2020.
All I can acknowledge is what the intelligence shows, right? I only know the intelligence community has zero evidence that someone has that a foreign power flipped a vote in 2020, 22, or 24.
You're able to acknowledge that Venezuela has not tampered with voting machines in the United States?
No, the intelligence is very clear. They did it on their own machines. Why is it important that they did it on their machines? Their machine protocols are the same as America. Why? Because for a long time they did exactly.
And so the 2020 election was in fact the results as we, the American public.
I'm still researching, so let me. This is the first.
But there's no intelligence.
Not yet.
There is no intelligence that the election would have said that Donald Trump was president.
The president said that tonight.
Vaughn, who's the woman yelling over and over again, "We got to go," and physically putting her body between you and John Solomon?
I know from your time at the White House, they're called wranglers. Essentially, they help cabinet officials that are making their way from on the driveway there around the White House grounds. And she was the one that was moving him along there in real time.
Was he doing other interviews?
He did an interview initially with CBS, and then believe he was heading over to Newsmax, I believe was the next outlet. But that was where we had that brief opportunity for that interaction. And I got to say, we don't have that many opportunities, interactions as much these days, and we're limited. MS Now, we haven't been welcomed into the Oval Office since our separation from NBC, and so our opportunities to see some of these officials are very limited. I will say that MS Now's reporting has been repeatedly cited by folks that were even cheering on the idea that there was mass conspiracy and fraud in the 2020 election. We had been reporting about the intelligence that the president had available to him. I was told, for example, Nicole, that the president had intelligence related to China's influence campaign, and that there were deliberations that had been in intelligence community for the last year and a half, and that the president was aware of the influence efforts of China dating back to 2025, and notably dating back to earlier this year before he went to China in May and met with President Xi and called him a true friend. And so we heard last night the president suggest that this was a mass undertaking by this foreign government, China. But at the same time, he was aware of this intelligence, and the White House was before he went to that trip to China.
Mark Elias, there are about 4,000 things to ask you about. But first on the bombshell confession from John Solomon, that quote, there were no votes flipped in 22. He does it in this weird order, 2022, 2020, 2024, and that Venezuela did not interfere. No foreign government interfered in the U.S. election of 2020.
Yes, Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. There were no votes flipped. We know that. We knew that before John Solomon said it. I agree. It is a surprise, and kudos to the reporting here to get John Solomon to say it on the record. The woman who was charged with wrangling him, you could tell, was like she was dying inside. She's like, I am somehow responsible for this mess. Let me get him out of here. But the fact is, there were no votes flipped. We knew this before. There were recounts. For example, in the state of Georgia, there was a hand recount, any machine recount, and nothing turned up that there was anything irregular that went on. What we have to pay attention to, though, Nicole, is the second part of the speech, and particularly right before he gets to the SAVE Act, when Donald Trump pivots from this nothing burger of misinformation and lies to saying that he now needs to fix the elections and that he is going to have the government scrub the voter rolls. And we saw today the Secretary of Homeland Security ratchet up the pressure once again to get access to the sensitive voter data that these states have. It is also not, should not be lost on people that the Department of Justice lost their 16th lawsuit today, just before we came on air, this time in Connecticut. They are now 0 for 16 in getting that data. But you and I have been talking for months about the frantic efforts of this administration to access these voter files so that they can remove voters from it, remove U.S. citizens from it. And I believe, as strongly as I sit here, that what they are trying to do is remove Democrats from the rolls so that they can gain an advantage and make up the deficit they have this fall.
I want to start this conversation with former DHS Chief of Staff in Trump's first administration, Miles Taylor, and Jena Griswold, Colorado's Secretary of State, who's been battling false election claims. She's also the Democratic nominee in the race for state attorney general. It's good to see both of you this morning. Miles, I'm going to start with you and just let you go and give me your reaction to this primetime address from the president last night.
It's very hard to dissect this because in more ways than I expected, Donald Trump shot himself in the foot. And you said this in the lead-in. I mean, again and again, his goals last night were contradicted by the own documents he released. He wanted to show that there was a sweeping Chinese plot to keep him from becoming president. The documents themselves say that it was low-level activity that didn't result in any changed votes. He tried to portray the fact that the intelligence community hid this from him. The documents he released showed that he personally was delivered these assessments before he left office. He wanted to show that this justified the need for the Save America Act and voter ID. But the documents he released showed that votes weren't meddled with, that none of the tabulations were affected, that the election was free and fair. He wanted to show that deep state corruption affected the outcome of the election and hid this plot from the American people. What his documents he released ended up showing is that the information was declassified 5 years ago and that Donald Trump himself was briefed on it as far back as 2018 and made public speeches about it. If anything, the president last night should have thanked all of these public servants in intelligence, law enforcement, and homeland security under our first administration who helped protect his campaign, the Biden campaign, and the 2020 election. It was really, really extraordinary to me. My takeaway by the end of it was, I don't know how this speech got out of the White House and that no one said, Mr. President, you're about to prove the opposite case you think you're proving. But that's what happened last night.
Jena, at the same time, his allies, both political allies and in the media, I mean, they're cherry picking pieces of this, running with it as though there was groundbreaking information, despite the fact that experts say it's sort of a reheat of all the same stories and narratives that he's tried to push over the last 6 years. I think one of the most dangerous parts of what he put forward to was, the president saying that DHS has compiled this list, 278,000 non-citizens, they say, registered to vote. And when you hear that and you understand that we're 109 days away from the midterms, what do elections and law enforcement officials at the state-by-state level need to be doing to prepare right now, knowing that this DOJ may go after them if they claim and say that non-citizens got the opportunity to vote on their watch?
That's a great question, and good morning. Thanks for having me on. To take a step back, I totally agree with Miles that the presidential address was used to push out more election lies. The documents are nothing new, no bombshell, just a bunch of recycled, debunked claims by Donald Trump about our elections. But you are exactly right. That address and what the president has been doing is fundamentally dangerous for American democracy. Make no mistake, he is in an open power grab and actively working to destabilize the 26 elections. We have seen him weaponize every lever of the federal government, including now the presidential address, to try to inject chaos and doubt into the elections. And what states should be doing, what Colorado is doing, is building out contingencies for federal interference. The president may want to talk about debunked claims about foreign adversaries, but our top concern at this point is Donald Trump's federal interference. The state of Colorado, we have been working on our contingencies for a better part of a year with state and local actors, partners, to make sure that we're ready. We've also adjusted this last legislative session some of our laws, including the ability for the governor to call an election emergency caused by federal interference. We're going to be sending out mail ballots earlier. We're opening up drop boxes earlier to make sure that we have time if there's anything that we need to respond to. And also, I am very proud that we worked with the legislature to make it very clear for the 2028 election that no candidate for the third term of the presidency will ever appear on the Colorado ballot.
Miles, a key part of this whole thing was the president's assertion that there's this sort of scary intel cover-up of documents that implicate China and Chinese actors here on U.S. soil. You personally briefed him. You acknowledge this. You were there in the first administration. Break down for me the truth.
Well, that's the reason I'm smiling is the president of the United States went and made a claim on national television last night that is easily disproven by living human beings who he appointed to serve in his first administration. He suggested that the plot from the Chinese Communist Party to potentially interfere in U.S. elections was something kept from the president. I can tell you the truth was we couldn't get the president to pay attention to election issues. We were screaming to the White House when we finally did get Trump to pay attention to the fact that foreign adversaries like Russia and China were trying to interfere in 2018 and 2020. He only listened to the part where we said some of them, like China, might interfere to hurt him. He ignored the stuff about Russia. And if you don't believe me, that's okay, because you can go look in the public record that Donald Trump went to the UN General Assembly in September of 2018 and publicly declared what we had briefed him, that the Chinese Communist Party might try to interfere in our elections. This is damning. The president himself publicly warned about the thing he just told us last night no one ever warned him about. That completely contradicts itself. There's a lot more out there, but the point being, Donald Trump did not care in the first term about election security. He cared about selective election security, and that's why we at DHS, that's why people across the intelligence community were worried. He did not seem to want us to guard against interference that might help him, and he wanted us to guard against interference that might hurt him. What the intelligence community did, what the national security community did, is protect against both. And the documents Trump declassified last night show that the system worked. It protected his campaign, Joe Biden's campaign, and America's ballots.
Speaking of selective storytelling and cherry picking, right now, Secretary Mullen is speaking about the alleged threat of non-citizen voting, Jenna. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, I don't know how many Americans know this. They have studied this, and they're not the only ones. But they say that there are only 77 confirmed instances of non-citizen voting nationwide found between 1999 and 2023. That is more than 2 decades. And by the way, in every single one of those instances, the appropriate authorities investigated those cases. Jenna, from your standpoint, from your state, how real is the threat of non-citizen voting?
Non-citizen voting is extremely rare, extraordinarily rare. It's not something that there is any evidence of happening in a widespread manner. There is ample evidence that Mullins is an election denier and now leading the Department of Homeland Security. There is ample evidence that Donald Trump, although he talks about election security, is the person who has made our elections less secure. He took the helm in his second term. What does he do? Disbands the Department of Justice's work on foreign interference, disbands the Department of Homeland Security's work on foreign disinformation. He then fires most of our federal partners that used to work with states and localities in securing our elections. They are using the bully pulpit of the presidency, of the federal administration, to mislead and lie to the American public for a very clear goal: Trump and MAGA know that they very well may not perform that well in November. So they are laying the groundwork to try to reject the results. That is what this is all about. We've also seen Trump issue 2 unlawful executive orders on elections during his second term. Those have largely been stopped. They're suing states all across the country to try to get access to sensitive voter data. They are largely losing. They've lost every case so far. And just last week, Trump's DOJ tried to intimidate election officials, threatening prosecution. Well, we will not be intimidated. And I want your viewers to know that there are people standing strong in every state rejecting this craziness coming from the federal administration. They will not succeed in trying to grab control over the 26th election, and we will have free and fair elections in November.
Well, I know that there are a lot of Americans who are worried about exactly that and counting on folks like you to stay in this fight so that they can feel secure about voting in November. Jenna Griswold, Miles Taylor, always good to see both of you, and thank you.
Joining us, Hofstra University law professor James Sample, MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard, senior editor at The Atlantic Hannah Rosen, and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst and former assistant FBI special agent in charge, Michael Feinberg. Everybody, welcome. Vaughn, Ty Cobb warned last night that was a predicate for Donald Trump to declare a national emergency. What reporting do you have?
3.5 months from the midterm elections, the president of the United States told the American public that their voting machines and systems were a threat of being manipulated and their elections effectively being taken over by hostile foreign actors. And I had a conversation with a source within the administration earlier this week, before the president publicly made that assertion, that this was intelligence, Katie, that the president had been presented by his intelligence agencies back in 2025, that the White House specifically, including Susie Wiles, were presented this information. And yet, fast forward, it's no longer 2025. It's July of 2026, 3.5 months. It took for the president to go and make this declaration public. And the reason why this is significant is the fact that the president has effectively gutted CISA, the main cybersecurity agency within the Department of Homeland Security that works to ensure the security of voting systems at the state and local level. And just today, Markwayne Mullin, the DHS secretary, threatened states that don't turn over their voter rolls that they're not going to get any federal resources to help with their elections. And so essentially the president is setting up, Katie, out of his speech last night, a potential of declaring a national emergency or some means in which he tries to justify the federal government potentially trying to handle the elections in the states based off of what he set up was a national security threat posed by foreign actors.
So can he do that?
He can try, but legally speaking, the answer to that is absolutely not. And the reason I say that the reason is absolutely not, Katie, it actually goes to a different president, Truman, not Trump. And this takes a second, so I want you to bear with me. But 1952, Korean War, there's a threatened steel strike. And Truman wants to seize the steel mills because in the middle of wartime, losing the ability to produce steel is a very serious matter. He declares a national emergency and wants to seize the steel mills in order to put them to work, in essence. The Supreme Court says, in an opinion that it remains a landmark to this day, an opinion by Justice Robert Jackson, sets out a 3-part test for what a president can do merely by declaring a national emergency. And the test is simple. It is based around the relationship between Congress and the president. Have Congress been silent on the question? Is Congress supportive of the question? Or has Congress spoken against the action that the president wants to take? The president here is trying to, in essence, pass the Save America Act without Congress. That puts the president at his lowest ebb of power. He does not have the power to relocate constitutional authority that exists in the legislature. The word emergency is not a get out of.
You had 3 examples there. What is this Congress doing?
This Congress has rejected the SAVE Act repeatedly, as we know. So that would put President Trump declaring an emergency and trying to do any of these things at his lowest level of potential power vis-a-vis declaring an emergency doesn't solve that problem.
So if he tries to declare it, I'm trying to get the logistics here. If he tries to declare it, what happens then? I assume there'll be lawsuits. Is there an injunction? Does the Supreme Court get immediately involved? What is the process?
There would be injunctive relief immediately. There would be lawsuits. There are lawsuits that are being prepared for this eventuality or hypothetical eventuality. Right now, the lawsuits are already prepared and ready to go.
Could it happen fast enough before Donald Trump started trying to seize voting machines or whatever it would look like to declare a national emergency?
He could declare the emergency. It doesn't change the fact that declaring an emergency, we have statutes, a National Emergencies Act, IEPA, which was the statute at issue in the tariffs case. Think about IEPA as a perfect example. It certainly applies to foreign monetary policy. It applies to lots of things. But international emergency economic policy, right? The Supreme Court said the word tariffs isn't in the statute. The word taxes isn't in the statute. You know what is not in any emergency act, any emergency statute?
Elections?
The word elections. He has no authority to assert executive power over elections. And the reason here, Katie, is simple. The framers of the Constitution didn't omit that emergency power accidentally. They were very aware of what an executive who had control over elections could do.
Well, that's heartening. All right, let's talk about what the president tried to claim last night. He presented a lot of intelligence, declassified stuff, tried to make it sound like it was big and revelatory, that this was information that was being kept from the American public. Michael, did you see that?
No, not at all. What I saw the president do was a subtle but very manipulative maneuver. I don't know if it was of his own volition or because his advisors set him up for this, but he fundamentally elided the difference between raw intelligence and a finished analytic conclusion. The intelligence community collects hundreds of thousands of data points any given day, from human sources, from signals intelligence, from environmental variables, from more sectors than you could possibly imagine. And not all of that is evaluated, and not everything that is evaluated turns out to be true. But because it's been collected, it ends up in a file somewhere in the CIA or NSA or FBI. And what we saw last night was the release of a lot of unverified allegations. And what I strongly suspect is also there that he did not release, and I'm saying this based on the conclusions his own government drew in the final month of his first term, what he didn't release is all the information and conclusions that the government has contradicting those allegations. This was selective declassification of unfounded rumors and accusations that have no evidence backing them up. And let's be clear, this is why he installed people like Bill Pulte and Kash Patel and John Ratcliffe in their positions. They've shown time and time again they're willing to engage in this sort of behavior. So we're unfortunately at the point where the president and the intelligence community are lying to the American people by omission.
I mean, I have the intelligence document in front of me, the declassified intelligence document. You're talking about what was left out, what was cherry-picked. Well, I'll give you a big one. We assess that Russia is using a range of measures primarily to denigrate former Vice President Biden and what it sees as an anti-Russia establishment. For example, it's directing or encouraging proxies to spread claims about Vice President Biden. Some Kremlin-linked actors are also seeking to boost President Trump's candidacy on social media. More broadly, Moscow's efforts seek to amplify social discord in the U.S. and undermine Washington's global standing. There's also this, other foreign actors. A range of other foreign actors have expressed preference for the outcome of the election. We have reporting on a few that have either considered or taken steps to attempt to covertly influence U.S. voters, presidential candidates, or U.S. politics surrounding the election. That includes Turkish officials. The president has been glowing about Erdogan and Turkey of late, just leaving the G20 summit there the other day. Hannah, besides the contradictions in what was presented last night on paper and what Donald Trump tried to present to the American public, there is an inherent contradiction in the actions that he's taken. He's accepted the primary results so far this year. He's talking about rigged elections and vulnerable elections and elections that Americans can't trust. They can't be validated, he's implying. And yet, Ken Paxton is somebody that he's happy to champion. Thomas Massie lost his primary to a Trump-picked candidate. Same with Bill Cassidy in Louisiana. He's had no problem accepting those results. Why should we believe this administration is suddenly so worried today?
That contradiction is so obvious, it's almost hard to talk about. What about the 2024 election? You didn't mention that. He doesn't talk about that election, but he talks obsessively about the 2020 election. So what happened? Like, all the machines got fixed in 2024, but they were broken in 2020. I mean, the argument really does not hang together. The one thing we haven't talked about yet is the power of the states. Inherently, as many people have said, the president has limited powers. The executive branch has limited powers over elections for a reason, but the states don't. And one big change between 2020 and now is that a lot of election deniers, election skeptics, whatever you want to call them, have risen to power in states like Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, a lot of swing states. And also Stephen Miller's legal group is filing challenges in a lot of these states about very specific things, like the voting machines and drop boxes and all that kind of stuff. And all of this is preceding the argument to say, oh, the results are null and void. If we lose, the results are null and void. So they're not just addressing this at the executive level. They're also addressing this at the state level around the country, but especially in swing states.
So I guess what is that going to look like if they're going to declare them null and void? Does that mean votes don't get certified? Does that result in another riot? What is if the courts are going to get involved, as James was arguing a moment ago, Hannah, if they start to try and deny the results at the official level, the federal level, what does that look like and what happens?
One of these people can correct me. I don't think we've been there yet. I mean, in Georgia, there was the famous call with Brad Raffensperger, who was then the Secretary of State, where Donald Trump said, find me those 11,000 something votes. And Raffensperger said no. However, there was recount after recount and investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigations got involved. There were several, there's a hand recount. There was a machine recount. And yet he still doesn't accept the results of that election. So I'm not sure, but he hasn't overturned the results of the Georgia election. So maybe someone else on the panel who's a legal expert can help me out. Have we ever been at a point where a president actually declared an election null and void?
And this is part of the documents that the White House released. Russian actors have circulated narratives about voter fraud resulting from mail-in balloting and called some U.S. primary voting processes rigged by the Democratic Party, where basically the intel community, and this was Donald Trump's intel community in 2020, admitting that Donald Trump was using Vladimir Putin's talking points. The Russian government are advancing narratives with U.S. officials and other prominent persons as well online. These figures, says the documents released by Donald Trump, these figures are conspiring to intensify efforts as the election approaches to orchestrate a high-profile scandal implicating Joe Biden and the Democratic Party at the peak of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. This document released by Donald Trump to prove that U.S. elections in 2020 were rigged says their aim is to defeat former Vice President Joe Biden and to ensure President Trump's victory. The incompetence is staggering. It's overwhelming. He has this speech. The Republicans, for people that don't know, I know you know this, Republicans were freaking out on the Hill all day. They did not want him to give this speech because they knew it would end just this way. with Americans concerned about how much gas costs, how much their rent costs, how much their health care costs, how much their health care costs, and how much their health care costs, the war going on in Iran. He does this speech anyway, and this is what happens. The only thing he proves is, well, let me read his words, that the Russians' aim was to defeat Joe Biden and ensure Donald Trump's victory. That's Russia. That's Russia. And also, of course, that the Russians were using their time-tested theory of vote rigging in a Western democracy, which Donald Trump picked up and spouted out and accepted just hook, line, and sinker. So tell me about the speech last night. What did he accomplish? What did he not accomplish? And was he really just trying to lay the predicate for trying to rig the November election?
Well, I think first we should say, Joe, that I'm not sure. What do you think the total number of times that Donald Trump has said that the theory that Russia intervened in the American election in 2016 and in 2020 to try to help him win? How many times do you think he said that that's a hoax over the last 10 years?
Right.
I mean, can you count that high?
Right.
Can you count that high?
No, I can't.
And now he's declassified. Now he's classified a bunch of documents that basically prove that what Robert Mueller said in 2016, which was there was no collusion between the two of them, but also that the Russians had intervened in the election on Donald Trump's behalf, and that it just happened again in 2020. The Russians like Donald Trump. They want him to win. They're on his side. That's what these documents prove with respect to Russia. I think that, Joe, you pointed out the people on the Hill did not want him to give this speech for a variety of reasons. This is the last topic that any Republican who's in a contested election in America wants to be talking about right now. Election conspiracy theories, Donald Trump's monomania over something that happened now more than 5 years ago in 2020, as opposed to talking about the real lives of real people in 2026 and the future. So they don't even want this topic on the radar, let alone to have Donald Trump doing what he did last night, which was, scoring what I believe they call in the World Cup parlance an own goal on so many of these matters. And I do think that the key element of this speech is the assertion that, without evidence, that a number of foreign powers, principally China, but also Venezuela and others, have the ability, as if to kind of suggest that at will they could go into American voting systems, that the electronic counting systems are easily manipulable, and that the hostile foreign powers will be able to change votes, even though there's no evidence adduced anywhere in this that they've ever done that before, but that their ability to do it is setting the table for a claim after the midterm elections, if they don't go the way Donald Trump wants them to, that is precisely what has happened here. And you can very easily imagine Donald Trump just saying, well, I told you China could manipulate our elections. And now, on the face of it, it's obvious that they have. We must have an investigation over the course of the next 2 years.
Yeah.
This is why we must federalize elections. We now have to investigate. We have to get to the bottom of this. But obviously, this election is fraudulent. I just, that it's as clear as day. That's part of what this speech was about, was setting the table for that.
Right. So what's so interesting is something new here, and that is how the media covered this. And Willie, first of all, Fox had that disclaimer that they were reading a legal brief practically for a million different reasons.
Well, for 778 million reasons. Yeah.
And then Fox News this morning, the comfy couch, they didn't mention this speech when they opened the show this morning. So that's incredible in itself. And then a lot of networks chose not to cover it. And if I understand correctly, CBS, because Tony Dokoupil's been kicked around a bit, they did an extensive fact check on the speech, pointing out disinformation. I think the media in some ways did its job here.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mika. I mean, there's not an obligation on the part of the press to platform just bald-faced lies and amplify them to tens and millions of people in this country. NBC did not take it live. ABC did not take it live. And before Trump supporters throw their outrage, there were speeches, primetime speeches by President Biden and President Obama that the networks decided they didn't need to take live either. There's a precedent for this. But there was a decision made at several networks not to show this stuff because we've heard it all before. We know it's lies. The other approach was the one you touched on, which was CBS before and after gave long kind of takedowns of what the president said. Even, I will say, Fox News came out of it and Sean Hannity was hosting. He was not thrilled by the speech. I think low energy and let's move along was kind of the theme of the night. Quick wrap up of it, not sort of fanning the flames of the claims. Let's turn the corner and get to some other stories. So, and you know, our MS Now and others, they dipped into it and then came out as soon as the lies started and debunked all of it. And even streaming platforms at NBC News did kind of the same thing there. So, yeah, I think that there was a decision made that we're not going to stand by or we're not going to participate in this further campaign by the president to lead up to something else, Sam Stein, which he kind of gave away at the end of the speech, which is, here are all these claims that, by the way, are not true, but I'm going to put them out there anyway. And why am I giving this speech in primetime? Because of what I just said. Now we must pass the SAVE Act. So this is pretext. This is predicate for what he wants to do. He's been stymied a bit in the Senate. They say they're not going to pass the SAVE Act, so he may find other ways to influence the outcome of the 2026 election on the platform, on the foundation of these lies he told last night.
Well, like the rest of you, I put on my tuxedo last night to watch the speech and left the cummerbund on this morning accidentally. This did seem, I thought the biggest part of the speech was sort of the unstated context, which we've been alluding to here. Why give the speech now, right? I mean, some of the stuff, and I was sorting through the documents last night they put up, has been declassified for weeks or months by Tulsi Gabbard and others. Some of it's old and has been out there in the public already. They could have done a version of this speech at various points during the last year. So why do it now? And the only sort of logical explanation is that this is pretext, as you said, that they are going to say, well, there's real vulnerabilities. We have evidence that China has access to this voting data, which, by the way, you can buy. We could see, the mail-in balloting is insecure. Therefore, we need to federalize these elections. And that's the real concern that when you talk to people in the democracy protection community will happen, that we're going to get into, we're like a couple months away now, just months of intense litigation around what role the federal government has in administering state-run elections, because they are state-run. And so I sorted through all this stuff last night. I went through these documents. It is woefully unsubstantiated, the claims that he made. In fact, as Joe's been talking about, a lot of the stuff that's in these documents, the primary material, just supports the opposite. It supports the idea that Russia was the primary actor here trying to interfere with the elections. And yet none of this matters. We're in this post-truth world where Trump is obviously it matters, but we are in a post-truth world where Trump will use this stuff, all this evidence that doesn't support his claim, to create a legal rationale or political rationale to ramp up the federal government's involvement in our midterms. That's the only conclusion people are drawing.
Well, and you look at the polls, Mika. What's so sad is that actually almost 2/3 of Republicans have just marched in lockstep or in an Orwellian way to say, oh yeah, the 2020 election was rigged, because dear leader has been repeating it so much. Only 9% of Democrats, only 21% of independents believe that. But how sad that an entire party has gone lockstep and did exactly what George Orwell warned about. The party tells you not to use your ears, not to use your eyes, to just blindly follow dear leader. And this is where it leads you. It leads you down a pack of lies. Good luck with that.